Hi, I'm Circe Olson-Wessner. I'm the director of the Museum of the American Military Family in Tijeras, New Mexico, and this is our podcast, At Ease. I'm very pleased to introduce our guest veteran author, Sam Baker, who at age 99 is the oldest guest we've ever had on the show. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Sam is joined by his daughter, Sally, so we're excited to have her too. So Sam, jumping right in, I was looking at your website and I'm very excited to talk about your two children's books because, you know, we are a military family museum, but I wanted to talk a little bit about your military career and your military family first. And so I know you grew up in the South, and after you graduated from Mississippi State, you joined the Marine Corps and served in the South Pacific during World War II. What was your job during the war?
I was an assistant platoon leader, and I was very fortunate because the platoon leader didn't want to have anything to do with it. So he stayed up at battalion headquarters all the time, and I ran the platoon. The platoon had been on 2 under fire landings in the Pacific, and they were well organized, and they knew more than I did. There was an officer in the battalion that I respected. His name was Stingley. He was from Oklahoma. Claimed he was 1/4 Indian, but we doubt that. And I asked him one time what was the best advice he could give me because he had made a number of landings. He said, Sam, take care of your men, and when the time comes, they'll take care of you. That's the esprit de corps.
Wow, that is true. And I didn't say, I don't think I might have, that you were in the Marine Corps. I think you might have said that. Okay, cool. So I think that's great that you were assistant platoon leader, but then you, because the platoon leader didn't come, you just took over the job. I read somewhere that you flew over the North Pole in 1951. What was that all about?
Well, I became a commissioned officer in the Coast and Geodetic Survey, now NOAA, in 1947. In 1950, I went to the Washington office to learn how to make maps from aerial photography. One day, the secretary came and said, Captain Roberts wants to see you. And he asked me one question, Sam, are you afraid of flying? I said, no, sir. He said, well, you're flying, you're working for me now. 2 weeks later, after filling out all the forms, I got my top secret clearance and was off to Oklahoma City to join the top secret project with the Air Force. They gave us a B-29 and instrumented it with the material we wanted and put a 3,500-gallon gas tank in the rear Bombay. And we took off for Alaska. Our flights were, we had one 6-hour flight, but most of them were 12, 14, some 18 hours. Our mission was to fly 200-mile spacing lines from the North Pole to the equator and halfway to Hawaii and halfway to Africa and Europe. On August the 21st, we were in Keflavik, Iceland. We used to fly there from Fairbanks. And we loaded the plane up and topped off every tank because it's going to be the longest flight we'd ever had. The runway there was only 8,200 feet. We started down the runway, and at 4,000 feet, I could see the marker. And the pilot, Acevedo, said, Lund, the chief engineer, give me your turbos. He said, you've already had them from the beginning. Ace wasn't much on cursing, but he said, oh, yes. We were flying. We were going too fast to stop and too slow to fly. We went off the end of the runway, across the grass strip that was 20 feet down to the water. We dropped about 10 and we stayed afloat. We were so close to the water, I could see that the prop wash moving the water.
Wow.
20 minutes later, we had enough altitude. We climbed at 20,000 feet, which was our working area, and we went to work. my crew went on 4 off. We flew over to the 0 meridian by England, turned and went north. Everything was routine until the navigators announced on intercom, and we were all on intercom, 5 minutes to the pole. Well, as a kid, I had always followed Admiral Byrd's trips to the pole. And here I was, some years later, going to the North Pole, although I was 4 miles up, but it was still, I was going to the North Pole. Well, we celebrated, and I'm telling you, when we looked down below, there was nothing but solid ice, not even a crack. And we went back to work. 5 minutes later, we all shook because number 3 blew up. Number 3 engine blew up.
Wow.
They couldn't feather the prop, so it windmilled and took some energy. Well, there was a tunnel between the front and rear of the plane over the Bombays. So I climbed up there to be with the pilot, and because the Air Force provided the platform, we had charge of the program. So I asked Ace, what my options? He said, if we can make it to Point Barra, I can land, but I can't get you off. I said, not even with rocket assist. He said, no, they'll never try it. Too big a plane. I said, okay, what if we get over the Brooks Range? He said, then we've got 700 miles to Fairbanks. So I said, okay, call me when you get over near Point Barra. And many hours later, I went up in the front of the plane and watched it. We went over the Brooks Range and we went down to 7,000 feet. And then they cut number 2. And I said, what's happening? He said, it's running hot. We may be able to start it if we need it, but we don't want it to explode and we can't feather the prop. About 50 miles from Fairbanks, 2 F-80s from Elmendorf Air Force Base came up and parked themselves on the wings. It looked like they were so good at holding speed, it looked like they had attached themselves to the ring. And they said, what's wrong, flyboy? Your rubber bands break? Well, the pilot had been sitting in that seat for 23 hours. And he cursed, and the controller from the Allison Air Force Base south of Fairbanks said, I'll have no cursing on the airways. He said, we have smoke on the runway. You must make a GCA approach, ground control approach. And they said, no, I can't do it. I can't climb if I lose altitude. Well, that argument went on until I didn't understand why, but later on I realized why. He wanted to maintain altitude in case one of his engines quit. He could dive, get speed, and he could select better landing sites. Well, he dove and we gained speed and we came in for a landing, and a truck crossed the runway and he had to jump it and we landed. But number 4 quit before we touched the ground. So I always said God gave us an extra minute, because if it had quit a minute earlier, we may not be here. And we didn't have power to taxi. We just rolled to a stop. I got out and walked over to the grass and kissed the earth.
Yeah, no doubt.
And we'd been in the air 23 hours and 47 minutes without a refuel.
Wow. So I have a question I want to clarify. So you guys were mapping? Is that what you were doing?
No, we were top secret. I've never been debriefed, so I can't tell you what it was about.
Oh, bummer. I was going to break news right here on the podcast. Well, so wow. That reminds me of Grace Under Pressure, I mean, staying calm and, here are our options. I mean, I know pilots do the training, but it's amazing to hear. So were you scared at all, or did you have complete faith that the pilot knew what he was doing?
Well, we had a lot of faith in pilots, but what bothered me was when Ace came over the air, they cut the heat to the rear compartment to save fuel and reduce it in the front compartment. When Ace came over the air and he said, now, if we have to go down, don't parachute out because they'll never find you. stick with the plane. That's your best bet.
Wow.
So what are you going to do? We ran out of soup. We always got a 5-gallon thermos of tomato soup. We ran out of that, so we just got in our sleeping bags and slept away. What can you do? You can worry. You can look down and see the ice, and then when we got over land, that was more comforting because there were a lot of lakes and rivers that he could land it on, which would not deep enough to sink the plane. So we had a better chance.
Wow. Wow. All right. Well, I'm impressed. What will you do? Just go to sleep in your sleeping bag? Not me. I would have been worrying. I would have been single-handedly flying the plane with my mind.
Well.
So I spoke to your daughter, Sally, before this interview, and we're switching gears a little. She says that while you guys were stationed at Cape Canaveral, Florida, that's when you had your idea for your first book, Silly Adventures of Petunia and Herman the Worm. And so that's where they came into being. You'd go to work, you'd come home from work, and then you'd make up stories for her and her brother. And so I wanted to know what inspired your stories. But
let me correct.
Okay.
Let me correct a little bit.
Okay.
I had survey crews all down the Atlantic Ocean, which were responsible for putting the tracking devices for the satellite, for the launches on the grid. And so I had to go, I was away from home about 10 days out of the month. While I was gone, Janet used to read to them. When I came home, they said, "No, Daddy, you tell us a story." So I thought about when I was about 10, my father was a farmer. He gave all the sharecroppers garden seeds with one stipulation. If you have excess, let me have an opportunity to get it rather than feed it to the hogs. So we had 10 gallons of genuine dill pickles on the back porch all summer long. And it required a lot of dill. And the dill had caterpillars. They were this big. They were enormous, and they were mean looking. And I would wait until they looked like they were as big as they were going to get, take them off, put them in a shoebox, and feed them dill plants until they went into the puma stage, and they came out as black swallowtail butterflies.
Wow.
They were beautiful. I put them on my hand and take them outside, and they would fly away. They never came back. So I decided I would make a story up about Herman the Worm. And down at Cape Canaveral, he got aboard the flight, and he went into orbit and all. But they were so interested in the story that if I made a mistake, they said, "No, Daddy, that's not what it was." And they would never let me pick up where I was the night before. They always had to start at the beginning. And years later, when my son had a daughter, he said, "Okay, Dad, you've got a computer. Now's the time to start writing Herman the Worm." And I did, and we copyrighted it, and I gave him a copy. And then a few years later, Sally said, "Dad, let's publish Herman the Worm." But then we found out there were a lot of other books called Herman the Worm, so we changed the name to The Silly Adventures of Petunia, the little girl in the story, and Herman the Worm.
That's cool. Who knew that there were that many Herman the Worms? But it's such a good name, Herman the Worm. It just flows. So Sally, what appealed to you most about your dad's stories? Did you see your brother or yourself in the stories? Did he work you into the story? Well, he went to orbit, I guess.
Well, it was just exciting. And, Herman has a face and hands, and he talks. And my dad would make it really engaging. Like, we were in Cape Canaveral when John Glenn went up, and the first 3 astronauts in space. So Dad had it that Glenn, he was up with Glenn and he was waving to people, you know, Herman was like the ultimate unique little guy. And so Herman just was so engaging, and it was fun just to have our dad tell us stories, and, you know, before we went to sleep. So it was super exciting. And, you know, so it was just part of something special, with a special ritual with our dad, you know. And then we would fall asleep because, you know, we would make him start over and add to it and or whatever. And then we'd fall asleep somewhere in the middle of it.
Well,
let me add something.
okay.
I read in an article about a young couple who had just moved to Arizona from LA, who were artists with Disney on Beauty and the Beast.
Mm-hmm.
And I got in touch with the young lady and I asked her if she would draw Herman for me. And I paid her to do it. And that's the Herman that she came up with. As and then when it came time to illustrate it, Sally's good friend from college, Ann Hess, was a good illustrator, and we used Ann.
That's pretty cool. That's really cool. So this lady it just was in the newspaper that this woman was passing through, and you just.
No, she had just moved to Paradise Valley, Arizona.
He couldn't find her again. So we weren't able to use her because she was phenomenal.
Isn't that amazing though? You see something in the newspaper, you follow up, and there's actually a person who responds back. I think that's great. Yeah, wow. Well, so Sally, this question is for you. So your family was stationed in Cape Canaveral during the early days of the US space program. What do you remember about living in Cape Canaveral? What do you remember most about your time there, and how old were you?
I was, I think, between 3 and 7. And I remember mostly that there were just crowds of children, you know, like everyone would, you know, back in the day, you would just hang out in the street and there would just be groups of children that would go from house to house and people would play together. And it was just really fun. And I remember, you know, Dad, my father would say, why don't we turn on the TV? And we'd turn on the TV and we would watch the countdown for the rocket to go off. And then, you know, after it had gone off and it was going into the air, we would all run outside and you could see it in the sky. And that was just really, really cool. And to this day, you know, I sometimes think about it when you have that thick vapor, that was from the rockets going off. And we used to, you know, go out there a lot, and it was just a really wonderful time. There was just a lot of fun things to do. And we went to the officers club with my dad. We would watch cartoons. You know, they had a little cartoon area for us so our parents could have dinner by themselves. And, you know, we would eat or pick at our food and then run and watch cartoons. So it was like a really fun thing for the officers club, you know. And the last thing was when John Glenn or some of the astronauts came down, they were coming back home, they would have them in convertibles and everyone would wave at them. And, you know, it's such an innocent, fun time. People would line the streets and they would drive down in the back of a convertible and wave at us. So it was pretty exciting. Yeah.
So Sam, you mentioned that you put markers, you were mapping out markers or satellites. What can you explain to people who, like me, who don't understand exactly what you were doing? What was your job and what were some of the highlights of your time stationed at Cape Canaveral?
Well, at Cape Canaveral was a wonderful assignment. I would have stayed there for the rest of my career without asking for a promotion because I loved it so much. It was our first experience on a base. And when Janet joined the Officers' Wives Club, they had never heard of the Coast Genetic Survey before. So she had a lot of explaining to do. And they made her treasurer. And It was a great time. We entertained a lot. We enjoyed the club. And at that time, the base was and the surrounding area were loaded with the brightest, sharpest young people in the United States, all working on the space program. So it was exciting. Our schools, the schools there were outstanding. In the kindergarten or first grade, solid school teacher was a former member of the New York Ballet who had married an officer, and she taught her. She had a ballet class in school at 5 years old. They were advanced. Everything was advanced. It was an exciting time. And I loved my job because our job was to locate the tracking devices on the most accurate grid that was possible. Grid, X and Y. And we were charged with measuring one line, 10,000 meters long. We measured it the most accurate in the world. It was measured to less than 1 millimeter in length. My job after Cape Canaveral was hydrographic work in the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean, up mainly in Alaska. But my last job for 12 years was director of the National Geodetic Survey, where we install these little brass plates on the highest points in the area for the elevation. That's for the X and Y. And the local surveyors take it and break it down from there. So they know they have an accurate starting point, which is important.
Wow.
So it's a precursor to GPS. It's for mapping and surveying.
So
and we also measured the elevation. We tied it into sea level. All of our elevations were based on sea level, but sea level is rising so much now, and it's worrisome. It's going to be a very serious operation. I don't know how we're going to handle it when the water rises a foot in New York City and in Miami. And look at the coastal islands, Fiji and countries like Mozambique. Some of the little islands will disappear. Where are those people going? But that's off the subject.
No, but it's something to think about, because I would imagine if you're mapping your elevation and altitude based on sea level, if you're at 9,000 feet today, but the sea level rises a foot, now I may be totally missing this, then the new elevation is 8,000 feet, right?
No, you said 9,000. You're only rising a foot, so you'd be 8,999.
Oh, see, that's why I failed math. But it's off, right? It'll make everything off. You'll have to remap everything.
Well, it's going to create problems.
Wow. Well, so I'm thinking about your career, and you've told us about it. So you were in the Marines for 30 years.
No, that's a mistake.
Okay.
I was in the Marines for 5 years and 5 months.
5 years and 5 months. Okay.
And then I was in the Coast and Geodetic Survey, now NOAA, for 30 years.
Ah, okay. And you actually worked on a fusion project for Brookhaven National Labs?
Yes. They hired me they were building a 2-mile circle accelerator. And they hired me to do all the surveying.
Wow. Where's Brookhaven?
That's Brookhaven is at Camp Upton, where
In New York, isn't it?
in New York, it's on the eastern side of the Long Island, near the town of Freeport, I think.
Okay.
That's where the man who wrote God Bless America, Irving Berlin, so that's where he was stationed in World War I when he started writing all his songs.
Wow, little trivia there too. So after you left Brookhaven, before retiring, then you became a GPS salesman. So that was such new technology, right? So people must have looked at you like you were crazy coming in and trying to sell them something. It's like trying to sell the internet before, it was a thing. How was it being a GPS salesman?
It was great.
Yeah.
Trimble Navigation was started by Charlie Trimble, who was legally blind at 5, had a reader all through school, went to Caltech, got his undergraduate's, master's, and PhD in electrical engineering, and he has yet to see the chalkboard. An absolutely fabulous individual. And I went to work for Charlie, and he selling these instruments. We sold each instrument, a single GPS sold for $50,000. And you had to buy 3 in order to get your order. And it took you 6 hours to get a fix. And today, you could get it on your watch instantly.
Yeah.
And one of the things that it might be good for you as a museum to have something on GPS, because it was developed in the military, is that have the inventors of GPS received the congressional medals from the White House. If they haven't, they're all gone now, but their survivors should receive this award. It was the greatest invention since the light bulb.
I'm just thinking about where all we use GPS. I mean, we even use it to tag our kids, like where our little kids. Wow. So who were your customers at $50,000?
All surveyors. The government, my old organization bought some, the Corps of Engineers bought some, but surveyors were anxious to get it because it eliminated one man in their crew, and it provided them, it upgraded their accuracy to the top level. And they could then do things they had never done before.
Wow, it's mind-boggling. So writing children's books is your 5th career. So I've got Marines and NOAA and Brookhaven and GPS and now children's book writer. So I have a quote that was attributed to you. It says, when you retire, you have a choice. You can just do nothing and let your time while away, or you can be active and time passes quickly. So is that why you chose writing, so that you wouldn't while your time away?
Well, I'm in a retirement home, and there's lots of activities here, but I got a little push from the children about start writing. First it was Herman the Worm, and then when I was about 10, I had a pet rat, white rat. Now everybody turns their nose up when you say the word rat. But she was the cleanest thing, the cuddliest thing. She would just cuddle with you anytime. And but my mother wouldn't let me bring her in the house. I had to keep her outside. And I built her a cage with a screened floor so that the droppings would drop out. And I gave her fresh paper, cut up paper to build a nest every so often. And one night when I couldn't sleep, I thought about my pet white rat. And I said, why don't I change her into a mouse and write a story? And the story of Oscar the Mouse, as a kid, you always told about the boogeyman under the bed.
Right, right.
And so I made Oscar the boogeyman. And it's a great little story. But I decided that to write a book, why not have a mission as well. Writing it was fun. Seeing it all come together, getting the illustrator to illustrate it and getting it published and all was great. But then there's a mission. If we can get children to learn to read, they'll succeed. And reading is the foundation for everything else you learn.
Right.
And children who can read will succeed. And so if my idea and my mission was, if I can just get one child to learn to read that couldn't before, I would have been very proud of my accomplishments. Just one. And hopefully it'll be more than one. And that's my whole aim. It wasn't to make money. It wasn't to get any fame. It was to get the children to learn to read. Because I enjoyed reading so much. It was my passion when I was a kid.
So you were 95 when you wrote The Silly Adventures of Petunia and Herman the Worm. And how is writing, now this is for the writers in our audience, how is writing it different than telling the stories? And what was your process around that?
Well, of course, I'm a poor speller, and writing it on a computer, it always tells you where your mistakes are.
Yeah.
Especially if you're on Word, it underlines them and gives you different choices. Telling the story, you can put inflections in it, but in writing it, I don't know how to do that.
He's a good humor writer, though, which is really rare. It's very hard to write humor where you burst out laughing. Right. And in both of his books, there's quite a bit of that. You end up laughing, which is a real gift.
No, that is good. I understand what you mean, though, about inflection, because if you're writing and you keep using exclamation marks because you're excited, too many exclamation marks make it look sort of silly, or it's over the top. And so it's very hard to get the humor and the excitement with not shouting or just making your writing look like.
And he has also the expressions on the characters, which help carry the story too, I think.
Yeah.
But he's a solid writer.
One of the things that television has destroyed is the need for children to imagine. Right. When I was growing up, radio was the only thing we had, but you couldn't see the actors. And there was a program called Fibble, McGee, and Molly.
Right.
And they had this closet full of junk. And then they'd open the door, you hear all of these things falling out. Well, you had to imagine that. In today's television, they show it falling out.
Right.
But how can you design a new tool or a new apparatus if you can't imagine it?
Yeah.
You got to imagine it first before you write it down or put it down on paper.
Right.
All inventors imagine it up here first before they put it on the paper. And if children don't have an imagination, they're void of a tool in life. So if you write and make the children read and imagine, I think it's what's needed today.
Well, I can see what you mean about having a mission to get these kids to read and think and dream and hope. So Sally, I know you encouraged your dad to write the story, but what did you think when he told you he actually was writing a book? Did you at that point say, oh, now I have misgivings that it won't get published? Or did you have advice, did you all of a sudden say, oh, it's really happening and now it might be my fault if it doesn't work?
No, it was, no, I was just excited for him when, when he started to publish it. It was shortly after my mom died and my dad's, my mom died, and it gave us a mission to do something and create something and move forward as a group. And it, my brother, me, and my father, we were all in on it. And then my friend Anne, who knew my mother really well. So we were all together creating something that was special. So we did, the Silly Adventures was made during that time. So it really brought us together and gave us a mission and gave us something to focus on besides grief, which was really nice for me. What did you think, Dad? Because that was what I remember about it. Was it pulls, when something you love passes away, you really need something to pull you out of that. And it was really, really helpful to have that project for everyone to hold on to and contribute to and, edit and talk about. And it gave us, was really helpful. It was a strong, and it was wonderful to have Anne in there to create all these fun pictures. And it was, it was a much needed source of joy. Yeah.
So without giving away too much to our audience, what is the book about?
Now, which book?
The Petunia book.
Oh, it's about accepting people different from you on an equal level. It's about sharing, and in a sense, it is what my childhood was like. My mother, my father was in business with a partner. They had a very large plantation, and my mother had a store to supply the supplies, and the Depression wiped them out completely. But during that first 7 years of my life, my mother wasn't home very much. So Emma, a young lady that my mother took in when she first got married, Emma was about 15. She taught her to cook and to sew and to read and write. And she became a better cook. And Emma was just great. My two older sisters were in school, so Emma raised me. And then when the Depression came, I began to know my mother because she was home during the day. And my dad, when I was little, I used to get up and have breakfast with him about 6:30 in the morning and go back to sleep again, and then get up and have regular breakfast because he was gone about 6:30 in the morning and not come home until late at night. And so if I wanted to see him, except on the weekend, I had to get up early.
Cool though. That is so cool that you did that.
And I was as thin as a rail. I was just a tiny kid. There was a dwarf in our family tree, and it was so small. My mother thought I was going to be one. And when I started growing, she was so thankful.
Wow. So your books are based on your childhood experiences, and both of the books are illustrated. And you told us a little bit about your friend that illustrated one of the books. How do you as an author work with your illustrators? Do you give them ideas about what you want them to draw, or do you let them read the book and draw what they think they want?
Well, a little of both.
Okay.
Anne and I on the Silly Adventures of Petunia and Herman the Worm, we wanted an illustration for the cover, and we wanted an illustration for every chapter. And we discussed over the telephone. She gave me some rough drawings. And then you have to give an artist a lot of free reign. Otherwise, you don't capture their ability. Now with Oscar, Oscar is a cartoon drawings.
Excuse me, my dog is barking. My doorbell rang. Let me go very quickly.
Okay.
You carry on. Show pictures and talk about the book.
Okay. Oscar is a cartoon book, and I met Lisa Morris at a luncheon one time, and she's a good friend of my best friend here, Earl Kaufman, who is going to be 100 in about 12 days.
Really?
Yeah, Earl, the 6th of December, he'll be 100.
Wow.
And Lisa said she'd like to try it, and she is fabulous. I had the outline of the story. She read it, and she came up with practically the whole book. And we made a few corrections, and this is the way to work. And she's already presented me with the first draft of the new book. Oscar Goes to the Vet.
Ooh.
Oscar has EBS. Do you know what EBS is?
No. I was going to
Eyes bigger than the stomach.
Oh, well, listen, I wanted to apologize for this. This happens only when I'm on Zoom. Nobody ever rings my doorbell, ever. But I live in a military community, and my neighbor stopped by to tell me I left the garage door open again. But so did I just miss breaking news? A new book is in the works?
No, that just happened. It is breaking news. There is a third book happening. So, see, there's the picture. You can see part of Mimi and Oscar over there. Dad, you want to? So that's over. There we go. So they're going on the next adventure where they're going to the vet. Oscar eats too much cheese and has to get sick, so he has to go to the vet.
Oh dear. Well, I think that's really nice that you recognize that the artistic spirit has to be allowed to carry on without micromanagement, and the drawings look absolutely charming.
Oh, she's a fabulous person.
Awesome. So I have learned that the Petunia book received a first prize Royal Dragonfly Book Award.
No, that was the Silly Adventures book. That one, it won for best chapter book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we got that mixed up somehow. Sorry.
So no, that's cool though. So you won a first place Royal Dragonfly Book Award, and so congratulations on that. How did you feel when you saw one of your books has actually won something? I mean, that's got to be such an amazing feeling. Did you feel validated as an author?
Well, it's hard to explain it. You feel as though your work that the time you put into it has been rewarded. Mm-hmm. Although I never wrote any books to make any money, and you don't unless you're top of the list. Mm-hmm. But it's a good feeling inside. Mm-hmm. We have to. Life is so short. You have to feel good about things. There's too much hate in this country and in this world. Mm-hmm. And you remember South Pacific, the grandmother was singing the song, you have to teach them to hate before they're 8.
Wow.
We need to be like little puppies. When Sally was about 4 and Mike was about 2, I bought a little beagle puppy. He was about this tall. It was a tiny little thing. 2 females had dropped 23 puppies one day apart. And there was one male. and I saw the advertisement when I was at Cape Canaveral over at Orlando, Florida. And I called up the woman and I said, I'd like to buy him. And I went by and picked him up, and all his sisters had run him into the corner. And I asked her, what was this? They said, he's different. And they don't want him to be a competition to them.
Wow.
And so I took him home and I didn't go in. I opened the door and just put him in. And he had never seen children before. And he heard Sally and Mike talking, and he ran to them. And Sally said, a puppy. That was the end of dinner. And that little dog couldn't stop kissing them. He kissed them all the time. Where did he learn to love? Where did he learn to love so much? He was always that way. He was giving you kisses. The only time he ever growled is when I had to pull a splinter out of his paw. And when we moved to California, we were on a hill, and he chased a deer down and got lost. And 6 months later, the woman who found him called the vet back in Virginia and got our address and delivered him to Janet. I was out at sea. And he immediately ran and kissed the children. And she said, you know, in the 6 months I've had him, he never kissed me.
Wow.
Why can't we learn something from dogs?
Yeah. Wow. That was a beautiful story. I think that should be a children's book right there. That would be a good basis for one. You're right. This puppy was different, was treated badly because he was different by his own siblings, and yet was loving and you know, able to open up to others. Wow. I have
He
little
also learned to spell.
Spell.
Yeah, he could learn. You couldn't say CAR in the house because he was at the door.
Yeah. Now our dog can spell too. He can spell COOKIE. So Sam, you published Oscar the Mouse at age 98 while you were in quarantine during this pandemic. So I think you've talked a little bit about Oscar, but very quickly, what is the premise of this Oscar book, and what kind of message do you want people to take from it?
Well, reinforcing what was in the first book, accepting people who are different than you, and the
friendship.
color of your skin is not a determining factor as to what the person is like.
And also,
we judge people by what they do and how they act rather than how they look. Because an artist can change a color of a picture. So why do we have to make color so important? My father taught me, he was an immigrant. He taught me that you treat everybody as the same person. And it was instilled upon us.
So I think what you were saying, what they taught, both my parents taught us was, you know, you treated the janitor with the same level of respect as you treated, you know, a CEO, or you treated a teacher, or you treated a contemporary. But you treated everybody with respect and honor.
Good message, yeah. So, Sally, where can your dad's books be found? Where can one buy them? They sound fascinating and great.
Well, we'll have to make sure and get you some. You can go to www.sambakerbooks.com, and there we'll send them out, and anybody that reaches out, we'll send bookmarks and stickers and coloring pages and other things too. So we have all of those goodies.
So Sam, do your fellow retirement community residents know that you're a writer?
Oh, yes, they're my best buyers. And I had a book signing for both of them. And you know, the nice thing about it, I would say 95% of us here have grandchildren. So they buy the books for the grandchildren, some cases the great-grandchildren. But it's rewarding when somebody says, I want two, one for me, one for my grandchild.
Yeah.
And then when you see them, they come back and say, Sam, I'm reading your book over and over again. It is such a delight to read. You know, that makes you feel good. At least you've accomplished a lot of your goal.
And there's one other thing. Dad's book, the Oscar the Mouse, children who don't like to read love that book because it's funny, it makes them laugh. It's about an older brother punking his younger sister and getting away with it. It's about Oscar being, you know, becoming a little girl's best friend. It's really fun, but it's a small little book. They have a couple laughs and they close it and they have a success. And so that's part of what we're building on for literacy, is to reach out and specifically try to reach and help people who have trouble, you know, challenges with reading, to learn to love reading and find joy in it and laughter in it. So we're doing a new thing, a new position going after children who, you know, are struggling a bit to read, and getting them the books so that, and giving them more support so that they can love reading.
So you gave feedback from your fellow retirement community peers, but what have children said? Have you had kids give you feedback about the book?
Yes, Sally's gotten a number of feedback. I gave a book to a man that probably wouldn't have purchased it because it was probably out of his price range. And I asked him again when I saw him about a month later, how did your son like the book? He's 4. He said, he makes me read it to him every night, sometimes twice. And now he wants an Oscar. And I said, no, he wants a mouse.
Yeah, that is a danger of having cute animals as your heroes in the book. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, another story, the place where I live is sponsors a class in a school in a disadvantaged area. And we had them here and they were reading my books. And I had 4 of them sitting there, and the 3 of them read part of it. And they came to him, he said, I can't read. Well, he looked as though he was defeated. And I had to find some way to make him feel a part of it. So I said, I showed him a picture and I said, now tell me everything about this picture that you see. And he went on and on about what the picture was about. When he got through, I said, you know, that's what is known as picture reading. So you can read.
Wow. Yeah.
And he was elated. His spirits woke up.
Yeah. Yeah. A
And
success. A success.
Absolutely. We have to find ways to give them more success. It's like eating an egg. You got to crack it before you can get to the good part.
Right. So speaking of successes, Sam, what tips do you have for anyone who may be thinking of writing a book but is still on the fence?
Well, have you ever had a stalled car and you had to push it? you know it's awful hard to get it to start moving.
Right.
But once you got it start moving, it moves easily.
Right.
So it's the first step, like you get on a treadmill, the first step is the hardest one.
Mm-hmm.
At one time, I posted things around my apartment that says, do it, do it. You have to get, you have to be motivated to take the first step. And once you start, it's good. You know, the computer is so much better than handwriting. And now you can go to electronics, you can talk and it types for you.
Mm-hmm.
So there's really no excuse except time and doing it on a continuous basis, setting some time. Those people who take correspondence courses, I admire them. I took a correspondence course one time, and you could find all kinds of excuses why not to do it now.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be, that builds determination that you have to do it now, period.
Right. Well, I like the idea of the Post-it notes stuck with sort of affirmations, or actually just telling you, nagging Post-it notes. I like that.
Let me tell you a little story. First year I went to Alaska, we arrived at Dutch Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
And there were we had a doctor and a dentist aboard, and there were two families there working for an oil company.
Mm-hmm.
And they came over with their children. There were 3 children. And the doctor examined them, the dentist looked at their teeth, and it came on about 10 o'clock, and one of the mothers said, okay, let's go, school is open. I said, but this is a special occasion, you know, we just arrived. She said, if you give up to one excuse, the next thing you give up 2 excuses, the next thing you know, school is disrupted. She said, the harder the line you hold, the better it is. And she was right.
Wow. So you could apply that to writing or a project or
everything.
Yeah, it's like good life lesson. Yeah. Well, so we need to wrap it up, but Sally, I wanted to ask you, what do you want our audience to know about your dad?
I think everything they need to know, they just heard.
Mm.
I think he's remarkable, and you know, I learn stuff every time I listen to him. So I would just encourage people to listen to this, because it was really well, you asked great questions and you got really great answers. And to also to go for your dreams, to go for it. If you've got a book in you, then start writing. There's groups on Clubhouse, there's groups on Facebook, and just go for it. There's lots of support, and it's easier to do now. And, you know, follow it, do it, take that first step.
So Sam, is there anything that you wished I had asked you that I didn't, that you'd like to address?
Well, I'm trying to think. I appreciate the offer to meet with you. I find you're a delightful young lady.
Thank you.
And I wish you well. And where is the museum again?
The museum is in New Mexico. It's right outside of Albuquerque.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I've been there before.
Yeah, Kirtland Air Force Base is right there.
Yeah.
Mm.
Don't you have a tramway up to the top of the mountain?
We do.
Well, I took that.
Yeah, it's scary hot.
I went to a surveyor's meeting there.
Well, that would be right up your alley. Go to the highest point in Albuquerque, and there's probably a marker at the top of it.
Yeah, we were there, must have been in the early to mid 70s.
Mm.
It's probably grown a lot since then.
It has.
So I wish you well. I don't travel much anymore, but I will hope the museum flourishes and grows. And I hope you have a section about GPS, because it was such a great invention that came from the military. And the Nobel Prize was not awarded. They turned it down. The National Academy of Science filed a request for the Nobel Prize for a GPS, and they turned it down because they said it was developed by the military, which was Mr. Noble had said nothing would do with war. But the GPS has a second side. It has saved probably more lives than anything else that we've had except medicine. And
Wow.
we should honor those people.
Yeah. Well, I definitely wrote notes that we should look into the section, and maybe later on I can get some names for people. We can see if we can find some of the books that, talk about their accomplishments, and we can see what we can do. Because, when I think about the military, so many inventions started in the military or in the, in healthcare, in the VA sections, right? And then they go into the civilian world. I cannot imagine life without GPS. And you talk about, saving lives. Your car can call for help now and tell the paramedics where you are. My dog just wants to be on this podcast.
I used to have a cat that did that. Every time I was in the middle of a client call, she'd be screaming for food.
Well, I am going to just have to talk around him. But I wanted to thank you for joining us today, and it's been inspiring. It's been delightful. We're definitely going to invite you back when you do your next book. As always, I need to thank our podcast sponsors and my dog, New Mexico Arts, the New Mexico Humanities Council, Sandia Area Credit Union, and organizations like Military Brats Seal and Military Brats Registry. And I wanted to thank you so much for today's conversation.
Yeah.
Oh, you're most welcome. Please call again.
I will.
And we'll send you some books. We'll send you the books.
Awesome.